So the next thing is higher order functions and passing functions as arguments to other functions. So let me go ahead and create a new Python file for that. So higher order. And we've already been working with functions as arguments because this make counter thing here, oops, back here. So this make counter thing here is returning functions as return results. And then main is storing those functions in variables and then calling those things later on. So this is just sort of the other side of that. So let's take a look at some built-in functions and also a function that's in a library. So there's a function called map. Let me just show this from the Python console. So if I type map, it's actually class map, but I don't think that's what I want here. Map, let's do 0, 1, 2, 3. I'll explain this code in a second. Actually, I think I got it backwards. So lambda x plus 1, and then 0, 1, 2, 3. Then I need to convert that to a list. Okay, so this does what I expect. So let me tell you what it's doing now. So there's a function called map, and it takes two parameters. It takes a function. So this is actually a function. I'll talk about that in a minute, and an iterable. So an iterable can be a number of different things in Python. It can be a list or a tuple or a type, a container type that you define yourself that supports iteration. But basically, it's any kind of sequence that you can loop through one item at a time. Yeah, I will tell you what Lambda does, so bear with me for just a minute on that. But basically, this is just a function. So this is just a function. Ignore it for now, and we'll come back to it. And what map does is it applies this function to each element in this iterable. In this case, it's a list. So I'll say each element in the list one at a time. And then it takes the results of that and uses it to create a new list that gets returned. It actually makes an iterable, and then you can convert that iterable into a list. So it takes an iterable and it produces an iterator, and then you can convert the iterator back to a list of values. So I feel like I made that more complicated than it really is. So what it does is it takes this function, applies it to each thing in the list, and makes a new list, basically. And there's an extra step in there for efficiency, mainly, where it actually just produces an iterable that you have to turn into a list. So let's see some examples. So let me make a function called times2, and it takes a value x and it returns x times 2. So this is just a function that doubles whatever I pass into it. And then if under name is under main, then I'll call a main function and we'll def main. So what we're going to do is we'll print times 2 of 2 is times 2 of 2. And this should all look really familiar. And it says times 2 of 2 is 4. and we'll do times 2 of 3 should be 6. And it is. Okay. So now what map does is it lets me apply this function that takes one argument to a list of values or a tuple of values or whatever. So I can say values equals, let's say 1, 2, 3, 6, 19. And then we're going to do new values is equal to map of function times 2 times a list values. And I misspelled times. And then we're going to print in is values and out is new values. And then I have to convert this back to a list. Like so. So what it did was it went through each item in this list, it called times 2 on it, and it took the return value from times 2 and it added it to a new list. And then it printed the new list. So I could have done this in code like so. I could have said for I in, or call it V, val in values, result is times 2 of val. And then let's go ahead and have new vals is an empty list. And new vals dot append result. And then at the end, I'm going to have this. So print in is values and out is new vals, which is already a list. So you see these two things do exactly the same thing. This code goes through the items and values one at a time, calls times 2 on each, takes the results, adds it to a new list, and then that's what I end up with. This thing is just more concise. And the reason it's more concise is because it sort of separated this code into 2 different cohesive parts. So the first part of what this code is doing is it's looping through each of the items and values, and it's doing something on each one. So that's a cohesive thing, looping through a list and doing something on each item, and then gathering the results and storing them in a new list. And then this other thing is also a thing, which is taking a value and running some operation on it that's specified. So by sort of separating that out into 2 separate bits, we have the map function that takes this thing as a parameter and then applies it to each of the items here, gets back a list, and then returns that final list here. All right. So what we're doing, this is the key part, is we're taking a function, which is an object, and passing it in as an argument to another function. So functions being objects that can be passed around, a fancy way of saying that is that functions are first class in Python. So first class in a programming language for functions means that functions are values that can be passed around and passed as arguments to other functions. And then this thing here is called a higher order function because it takes a function as an argument. So a function that takes a function as an argument is a higher order function. And the fact that the programming language will let you pass functions around as arguments, saying that Python has first class functions is a fancy way of saying that. But the bottom line here is that I can take any function that takes an argument, pass it into map, run it on these values, and get results. Now, I could also do this. The values don't necessarily have to be numbers. They could be objects, or they could be strings. For example, I can do something like print map, and then I'll have a function. Well, I'm still going to write this as a separate thing. Let me capitalize. So I'm going to have a function called capitalize, and it's going to take a string and it's going to return string.upper, which converts the string to uppercase. And then since I have this capitalize function, I can map capitalize on dog, cat, bird, fish. And if I run that, it's going to print an iterable. So let's convert the iterable to a list. And we see dog, cat, bird, fish in all uppercase. So any function here can be passed into map, and it will get applied to any item here. And you'll notice that I can do that without map having to know anything at all about what this thing takes or what it produces. This thing has to know what a legal value is. So for example, like int, I can pass int into map, and I can give it a list of strings that have numeric values. And if I do that, what I get back is a list of numbers, because it takes these strings and successfully converts them. But if I have a string like cat in here, that's not going to affect map at all. Map says, okay, no problem. I have a function and I have a list of values. But when I actually try to run int on cat, then I'm going to get a problem. And I get an exception, invalid literal for int with base 10 cat. So I can't call int on cat. And I think that's kind of the error you would expect to see with something like this. So it doesn't say anything about map, because map isn't the problem here. Map will take any function and any list, and it just applies this function to each item in the list. Then it's up to the function whether it knows how to operate on the thing in the list or not.